This is Mia Hernandez with News Channel 7 at the WJHG 7 Plus Digital News Desk. And on 850 Unsolved, we're talking about the 1984 murder of Booker T. Lewis. In last week's episode, we established the basic details of the case, but let's go ahead and recap a few. On the night of September 19th, Booker T. Lewis left his home to work. He stopped by the gas station and the store before heading to his office, located at 1217 North Cove Boulevard. His wife Flossie would call between the hours of 7 and 11, but would not receive an answer. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots at approximately 8 p.m., 12 hours before the examiners were called to the scene. The next morning, Nellie Lewis would stop by Lewis Bonding Agency to check on her uncle, only to find him dead. Reports say he had jewelry and a large sum of money on his person, which have been retained by the police where they remain today. The case, Nellie and Marianne say, has run cold since then, receiving no new information and having more questions over the years on what happened to their beloved uncle, who they call their dad. There is, however, one person who says he knows who killed Booker T. Lewis. Meet Mike Jones, a former officer with Panama City, who reviewed Lewis's case.
In 1984, Mr. Lewis was killed. I started with the police department in 1976, spent my first 4 years on patrol, and then I moved into investigation. So I'd only been in investigations 3 or 4 years. Probably one of the first homicide cases I ever got to work on, and very minute my part then, because I was a rookie detective. Later in the early 90s, that case stuck with me for a long time because we never arrested anybody. And so I talked the chief into letting me do a cold case review of it. And that was in the early 90s, and that's when I really dove into it.
When Jones reviewed the case, an important element for him was the witness statements.
When I read the statements of the witnesses, and a lot of those witnesses I knew as some of them were criminals, some of them weren't. They had indicated that there was a potential suspect in the area the night of the murder, and that he was looking for drugs. He was wanting to buy some drugs or get some drugs, and nobody would give him any money or drugs because he was already high. He was already intoxicated, if you will, and he was carrying a gun. He was threatening people with a gun.
This review of witness statements led Jones to search for the man who was allegedly intoxicated, looking for drugs, and seen with a gun on September 19th.
So I started looking for that fella and found him in prison, in Rayford State Prison down south. And so I went down there and interviewed him, and he denied it. He wouldn't tell me anything, laughed in my face.
Despite the lack of cooperation from the man Jones believes committed the murder, he was confident in his findings enough to take it to the state attorney.
I got back after I interviewed him, and all the statements that I got from the witnesses, and a lot of those witnesses today are deceased, and put the case file together just like an investigator would, presented it to the state attorney's office. And back then that was Mr. Jim Appleman. And he said, Mike, you've got a good circumstantial case, but you don't have a case that the jury's going to convict on. And so we never prosecuted it. But in my heart, I think I know who killed Booker T. Lewis. Just not enough evidence to get him in court.
We asked Mike Jones what other information led him to believe this man was the man who murdered Booker T. Lewis.
Same caliber, same type of weapon. But of course we never got the weapon, so we were never able to do a ballistics check to see if the bullet in Mr. Lewis came from a weapon. We never recovered a gun.
The motive? Robbery, Jones says.
He just had the money. He's a bail bondsman, and I mean, you bond somebody out of jail, you get several $1,000s. Those drug users, they knew that. They knew they could go there, he'd be an easy hit. And that's why they did it, as robbery.
But Marianne says otherwise.
What's significant to me is they didn't even try to make it look like a robbery. It was clear that the intent was to execute him.
Lewis's girls have other information about who they believe killed their uncle based on what they were allegedly told back in 1984.
I do remember them saying that the angle of the shot was a short person, a person shorter than him. And some things were supposedly missing from his file. We never found out what it was, or and he didn't. It's not like he had a secretary or somebody. He did his own file.
Yeah, and the police said that somebody had to be in the truck, the bed of the truck, and shot him that way. And so that was that was the angle at one point. So they had to pull the truck down. So I don't know. They had different scenarios of what had happened. Mm-hmm. But what we always observed, this is what we were telling them, different things. So I don't know if they kept all of what we told them in their reports or not.
Nellie believes someone else may have played a role in his death.
Another bail bondsman had told him that he was deceased. And right after that, he was killed. He really was killed. And so we had told law enforcement about that. And I don't know if they really looked into it or not. And I think, in my point of view, that was significant in his death. And it really wasn't, to me, really looked into.
These theories remain unconfirmed. The girls and Mike Jones both share one theory in common, that the murderer could have been someone Lewis knew.
But he had to be inside the building to open the door, because he had to open take the bars down. He couldn't unlock from the outside going in. He had to be inside coming out because of the bars. That's the thing. So that's why I say he had to be somebody he knew to open the door.
You know, I never was able to prove that, but it could have been that Mr. Lewis bonded this guy out before him. I mean, he was a habitual offender. He was always in and out of jail, in and out of prison. And that could have been a link there, but we never put two and two together with that.
The iron bars on the door and the position of his fall has led Nellie and Mary Annie to believe that Booker T. Lewis opened the door up for someone he knew. But the theories do diverge, with Mary Annie and Nellie basing their theory off information they received from the 80s, and Mike Jones with the case the state attorney's office rejected to try.
Everybody that I talked to and re-interviewed that were witnesses in the very beginning that I interviewed years down the road during the cold case, they all told me, said he did it, Mike. There's no doubt about it. He was intoxicated that night, high on drugs, looking for drugs. Nobody would give them to him because he was so messed up. He was actually going around in the parking lot of, there were some old bars over there. One was called the Harlem Bar, one was the Midnight Lounge. And he was going car to car trying to rob people of their drugs. And it all added up, you know.
Jones reaffirms the motive was narcotics and money.
On my end of it, and what I gathered and was basing my, hopefully to rest on, was narcotics and money. There was a drug abuser out there. He needed drugs. He was hurting. He was going to get them any way he could, whether he had to go and rob somebody for the money to buy them or rob them of the drugs. And I think it was all drug related then and money related.
But again, Lewis's girls say it couldn't have been a robbery because his money and his jewelry were still left on his body. Mike Jones put together a case and still hopes to see it one day in court.
He was on his deathbed in the hospital a few years ago, and I went over and gave it one more shot with an investigator from the Panama City Police Department. And I went over and interviewed him, trying to get him to tell us if he'd done it. And he still said, not talking to you, not talking to you. So that was, I'm going to estimate 5 years ago maybe. So that's where we're at. Still an unsolved murder.
In next week's third and final part, we will discuss where the case goes from here and how Nellie and Mary Annie can finally get an answer after all of these years.
I pray before I die that it could be solved, you know. And I wish it would have been before his wife passed.
Until then, if you have any information regarding this case, you can contact the Panama City Police Department or the Panhandle Crime Stoppers. More information on how you can help this cold case is available online at WJHG.com. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. This is Mia Hernandez with 850 Unsolved.